Welcome to this ExecRank Continuing Board Education Program, Hipaa Compliance at the Board Level. This program is worth 3 credits.
With us today, we have Susan Pelham. She is the founder and senior partner at Pelham Grody Public Relations. Susan Pelham has 35 years of healthcare experience, both as a registered nurse and a public relations crisis manager. After selling her previous agency to Saatchi & Saatchi, Pelham served as the chairman of the LA and San Francisco offices of the Roland Company. Pelham grew the healthcare division to the largest west of the Mississippi and headed the agency's crisis management task force. Following her tenure at Roland, Pelham joined Burson Marsteller, serving as senior vice president and managing director of the West Coast Crisis Healthcare and Corporate Practices. She launched her current agency in 1994. Pelham provided crisis communications counsel to the Santa Barbara district attorney prosecuting the Michael Jackson molestation case, billed as one of the highest profile cases of the century. She is also credited with orchestrating the worldwide announcement of the first baby born in the world as a result of in vivo technology, a highly successful crisis management effort surrounding the first federal indictment and conviction of a U.S. hospital chain, as well as a variety of high-profile union-related crises. Pelham served as an adjunct professor at Pepperdine University after an 11-year stint as a member of UCLA's extension faculty. An accomplished public speaker and frequent lecturer, she was the sole PR practitioner on a panel of 11 media representatives sponsored by the prestigious Poynter Institute and USC Annenberg on the ethics of reporting on celebrities. Pelham was recognized by the Century City Chamber of Commerce as a 2007 Woman of Achievement and has written a chapter in several books for the Inside the Mind series about public relations, as well as served as book editor for sports medicine for the 80s. Pelham is a voting member of the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences, a Los Angeles Police Department Reserve Officer Specialist, retired, and a member of the FBI's InfraGard team and LA Medical Corps. In 2008, she was named a Malibu Public Safety Commissioner for a 4-year term and is a highly trained member of the Malibu Community Emergency Response Team. Thank you for speaking with me today for our ExecRank Continuing Board Education Hipaa segment. Today we will be discussing.
I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. Today we will be discussing HIPAA compliance at a board level. So I want us to talk a little bit about HIPAA from the board's perspective. How does HIPAA compliance affect a company's board?
Well, I believe, as do many others in the healthcare realm, that the ultimate responsibility for organizational compliance rests with the CEO and the board of directors. That said, I don't think that they particularly want to be in charge of doing IT for the organization. So they do need to know, though, that they are required to assign someone to be responsible for compliance with HIPAA. Based on that, since the focus is on electronic data, it would seem logical to appoint an IT director or a chief information officer. And if there's no one in place and you have to outsource this, someone within the organization must be given the HIPAA compliance responsibility, even if it's just to direct others to do the work.
Perfect. And what should directors of companies affected by HIPAA know?
Well, it's a really changing landscape. Virtually every day there's a new rule or a modification of existing rule, but adherence to HIPAA has to be an ongoing full-time effort. Successful compliance really requires diligence and continuous improvement. It was interesting to note that there was a top risks organization faced. There was a survey done by North Carolina State University's Enterprise Risk Management Initiative and a company called Protivity, Inc., and they conducted a global survey of more than 275 board members and C-suite executives across a number of industries in late 2014. Interestingly enough, of the top 10 corporate risks, there were four that really are important from a HIPAA standpoint. The first would be cyber threats. The second would be that the organization's culture may not really encourage timely identification and escalation of significant risks. Privacy and identity and information security risk was number 3, and the occurrence of an unexpected crisis was number 4. Many companies are not prepared with a crisis preparedness and crisis management plan, and certainly when you're dealing with HIPAA, that would be an important part of the planning. So of the 10 top risks, 4 really apply to the board. Some of the examples of boards making changes based on HIPAA would be to strengthen limitations on the use and disclosure of health information for marketing and fundraising purposes. Also need to prohibit the sale of information without individual authorization. All notices of privacy practice must be continually updated and redistributed throughout the entire organization. And really, with social media, one of the most important things is to prohibit the use of any work-related posts, photos, and tweets that could violate HIPAA. The board really is at the point where they must insist on a well-vetted and funded breach notification plan that's in place. I think when you look at Anthem, this is a perfect example. And there could be an inevitable breach. A strong plan would mitigate that risk and potential harm and, of course, the damage to the organization's reputation. So this plan, coupled with documented preventive measures and training programs, will show the stakeholders and the shareholders in an organization that leadership has made every effort to stop breaches.
That's so interesting. Thank you. Regarding HIPAA and the Internet, I know you talked a little bit about social media in your last answers, but how is social media such as Instagram and Facebook creating an easy medium for people to violate HIPAA? And how do you deal with these violations? And some of my examples that I just kind of throw out there are cell phones, videos, and photos.
Well, it's a huge universe, and we see practically every day, several times a day, where people have violated HIPAA by posting a photo. An interesting article in Hospitalists by a gentleman named Stephen Harris, where he was describing a couple of incidents. I think by talking about these examples, you get a better idea of how the HIPAA violations work. But an emergency room physician in Rhode Island was fired and lost her medical staff privileges and was also reprimanded by the Rhode Island Board of Medical Licensure because she posted information about a trauma patient on her personal Facebook page. And she didn't use the patient names and had no intention to reveal any confidential patient information. However, because of the nature of the person's injury, the patient was identified by unauthorized third parties. So, in other words, say you're in a car accident, you go to the emergency room, the doctor posts the information on the website and talks about the accident and the injuries. Well, most people wouldn't know that, but of course the family, if they're on the doctor's Facebook page, would know right away that that was the patient and their friends. So we basically violated HIPAA despite the physician leaving out all the information she thought might make the patient invisible. She did not omit enough. Then there was a second doctor, an OB/GYN doctor in St. Louis, who complained about her frustration with a patient. And she said, I have a patient who's chosen to either no-show or be late, sometimes for hours, for all of her prenatal visits, ultrasounds. She's now 3 hours late for her induction. And she may show up to be late for her delivery. Another physician then commented on this post, if it's elective, I'd cancel it. And at that point, she said, here's the explanation why I have to put up with this patient. And even though she didn't review the patient's name, controversy erupted after somebody posted a screenshot of the post and comments to the hospital's Facebook page. So the hospital felt that that was a real breach because she was saying negative things about the patient and it affected the hospital. So just even little things like that you have no way of thinking it is ever going to harm you by posting it on Facebook or Twitter or anywhere else can be a problem. So how do we deal with stuff like this? Well, first of all, you have to check your facility's social media policy. It might be common sense to never use identifying patient information on your posts, but even a picture, say you post on Instagram of your lunch, might contain a patient's chart on your desk. You don't even think about little things like that. Or a video posted to Facebook could have audio of the room next door. Say you're posting a little Facebook during a break and you happen to be sitting in a break room, but a patient room is right next door. That is going to be a problem. So the best policy is to not discuss patient or work-related matters on social media to avoid any kind of problems like that. And it's really difficult because everybody wants to share their work experiences and everybody's proud of the work that they do, especially in the healthcare field. So, you know, it's so natural and normal for people to want to go ahead and post a photo of here I am at work at the hospital or here I am at work in the doctor's office. It's a real dilemma, but it's so important that rules be set and that people follow them.
That is so interesting how strict those rules are. And so in terms of HIPAA best practices for businesses and board of directors and talking about these issues with employees, what are your thoughts on the importance of employee self-awareness training to avoid these HIPAA violations?
Well, education is really key. It used to be that you could fire an employee for breaches like talking to media, but employees have certain protections that have changed this. So if you aren't educating your employees, it's your own fault that the breaches occur. I can talk about one of my clients. It's a plastic surgery organization. It has quite a few employees. They have about 38 employees, and they have a staff meeting every month. And at that staff meeting, they have appointed one of the doctors to be in charge of educating everybody on new and information about HIPAA compliance. And it's a really great way to prepare employees and to keep them up to date on what's going on. They really believe in education. So I suggest that companies do the same thing. Hospitals doing staff meetings, all have staff meetings. So, you know, keep in mind that 90% of breaches are caused by human error and accidental data or device loss. You know, laptops left behind, lost cell phones. So tighter policies, procedures, education all help to prevent these occurrences. And on the black market, a stolen Social Security card costs $1, while a stolen medical record is worth $50. That's an important thing to remember in terms of your board of directors knowing that how valuable medical records are. And now that we're going to electronic medical records, it's going to be an even bigger issue. Prevention is really still the best medicine for reducing risk of information breach and ensuring HIPAA compliance. So the human error of breaches is solvable only through education and more education. The era where, you know, HIPAA long ago would send out these robust training materials, they sat on the shelf and collected dust. That is not going to be possible anymore because of all the data breaches and the internet and social media.
Excellent. And you actually just touched on a little bit about that photo sharing that's going on now with patients and physicians and using those electronic files. And I don't know if many people have heard of this, but sharing photo and information between patient and physician in terms of, you know, identifying symptoms, and they like to ask questions about their medical issues. Is this safe, and where does this information go?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, it's never safe. So I think most doctors are very cautious because they do not necessarily give diagnoses on the internet to protect themselves from liability. So while patients can ask pretty detailed questions, doctors tend to be rather tight-lipped when they answer information. Under HIPAA, a physician may use and disclose information for treatment, payment, or health care operations, But generally, using or disclosing that information through social media does not qualify as treatment, payment, or healthcare operations. If a physician were to use or disclose a patient's information without permission, it would be a violation of HIPAA and as well as state law. So there are no protections really when the information goes into the cloud. From there, it can go anywhere. I know that I'm a patient at UCLA Medical Center, and they have instituted an online ability to send emails to our doctors and for them to answer and to ask for medical refills and so on. It's a great, easy way to, cut time, and it's nice to have access to your physician for the first time, because it used to be that you would, have to make an appointment to go see them. But they're very cautious on how they use that information and really don't give you very much detail. And I think that's really the safest thing for a doctor, is just keep information at the minimum, and you will avoid risk.
Excellent, thank you. And I know your background, specifically from what we read too, is not only in medical, but especially in PR. So how should a company handle an attack from the PR perspective?
Yeah, it's interesting, because I'd like to see them not ever have an attack, but unfortunately that is it's not going to happen, and it's never going to be perfect. I think the last time I looked at surveys, only about 30% of companies actually had a crisis management handbook or some kind of information that they either reviewed once a year or they rehearse through it. There's a lot of different ways to be up to date on things, but the number of companies that do are really small. So how should they handle it? Well, first, if the person who committed the mistake realized what they did, they should immediately head to the IT department or whoever's in charge to address and correct or corral the breach. Second, I would contact all the organizations that oversee violations, and for the first thing I would do, as I do in any crisis, is let your attorney know and your insurance company know, because the fine in a HIPAA violation, it could even go as high as $5 million, and that's not a good thing for a lot of companies. So I would also bring in, if you don't have someone on staff who's a very experienced crisis manager, bring someone in, a crisis PR person, to help soften any potential negative press that can result. This is really about team building with the press before a bad thing happens. So I always suggest to my clients who are trying to prepare and be ready for a crisis that they should make a media list of all the media who might contact them in a crisis. Reach out to them, introduce yourself, so that when the bad thing happens, that they know who you are, they feel rather kindly towards you. I can give you a good example. When I was working with a very large hospital group, they had a major crisis, and they were in Medicare, violation of Medicare. And this was a very big case that was going to go before the state district attorneys, and they were in a lot of trouble. So basically, it was going to take probably 9 months before it ever got to trial. So during that 9 months, I just reached out to all the media that I thought might cover the case, from both the local standpoint and also national media that cover healthcare stories. I kept them in the loop. I told them what was going on. I wanted them to know so that they would be prepared when we finally did go to court. And in the end, we lost. We had the company had to pay a fine of several $1 million. But the fact is we got very little coverage in the press, because by the time we got to trial, it seemed like the story was pretty old and not very interesting. And so just because I'd been outreaching to them, they felt more kindly and were more likely to give my client a not a positive spin on the story, but at least let them give their side of the story. Then moving forward is a little bit, moving forward on this a little bit, it really is a very tricky thing with HIPAA because you've got the federal government involved, you've got local state government, you've got medical societies. There's just such a large group of different organizations that might come into play. So it's much more complicated in a way than a lot of other violations. So I definitely think this is a good opportunity to tell the board and the CEO, make sure you've got your crisis management and preparedness. If you have a booklet or some kind of an organizational overview, make sure you've got it in place. Review it every quarter and rehearse it if you can.
Excellent, thank you. That's really important information for boards of directors that need to, hear this about these breaches and how to handle that. And so our last area to discuss is the importance of protecting medical data. In relation to the recent attacks on Anthem Blue Cross, which I know you mentioned earlier, how do you protect your data from a similar attack?
Well, that's a big, giant question. I can't really answer that because every company is a little bit different. But you would assume that Anthem had a fail-safe security in place. The problem, I think, is more the sophistication of the cyber criminals than necessarily the problem with Anthem's security. Looking at Symantec, which is a security firm, it lists the healthcare industry as the worst offender of information breach, with about 43% of healthcare organizations reporting they experienced a breach in 2011. The government was second in that, by the way. The information breaches in healthcare become a near constant occurrence. So our company has Anthem as the insurer, and they issued a statement, but I think they issued it way too slowly. It talked about how they had a very sophisticated attack to gain unauthorized access to information, and it said as soon as it heard of the attack, it made every effort to close the vulnerability and let people know. I think that they were slow on that. The attack took place in early February, and the first opportunity we found out that it was breached was not till February 13th. When they offered a database and a toll-free number to find out if you were the ones that had your data breached. So I think you need to act much more quickly than that. It has to be a number one priority. Jump on it right away. Let people know that you're working on it right away. And they also, by the way, mentioned credit monitoring and identity protection services would be provided free of charge. That's great, but a lot of people don't even know how to work that. A lot of people who are insured are over a certain age. So the best thing is to try and avoid that, of course, in all ways. And I don't think that cyber attacks are going to stop. I think that as the criminals get more sophisticated, they come from other countries. I just think it's rather than prevention, which you definitely have to have, I think that the board has to go one step further and be prepared for it, whether you think you're going to have it happen or not, whether you think your security is great or not. It's just not going to be enough with the sophistication of these cyber attackers.
Excellent, thank you. And then my last question is, what are the risks associated with the electronic medical health records with the advancement of technology?
Well, I think the risks are huge. I think that the most recent attacks are no comfort because, we've been rushing into a lot of things. I've been reading lately. The whole medical records thing is on a pretty fast track. And based on what happened with Anthem and other large organizations that you would think have great cybersecurity, it appears that maybe we're not taking these risks seriously enough. Maybe medical records, electronic medical records, are not quite ready to be rolled out on such a large basis. So, the fact that the impact on companies with illegal crisis management, government remediation, everything that happens when you have a cyber attack could go, or a HIPAA violation could go as high as $4 million. It's troubling that companies are so slow to act. So, in terms of, for example, looking at some of the more troubling findings regarding HIPAA violations, we have to keep in mind that in healthcare PR, data security violations can become more than a little problem for the board of directors. So the thing to look at is only 1/3 of people who have been questioned about the guidelines of HIPAA and regarding healthcare. Only 31% of respondents say they have implemented guidelines for bringing mobile devices to work in healthcare settings. Mobile devices are huge. I mean, every day we hear more and more, everything is going mobile. So we need a workplace mandate that all mobile devices be encrypted and password protected to avoid any problems. And I think that's, something that a board of directors never thinks about. And the other thing, and I gave a crisis management speech recently in Las Vegas, and something that I brought up in one of the 10 things on how to prepare for a crisis is that you need a second server. You need to have all the data backed up on a second server. And HIPAA mandates that practices maintain retrievable copies of patient information. However, many are failing to comply. So even though it's a daunting project, it's maybe even simple to do. Moving to Apple Cloud perhaps is the best way to automatically back up patient data. But if the bad thing happens and your computers go down, you're going to be really happy when you have your data backed up on a second server. And the other thing I wanted to mention is very few practices have conducted risk analysis, and that is mandatory under HIPAA. And practices are failing to comply and conduct a thorough assessment of the potential risks. If they fail to comply, the confidentiality, integrity, and the availability of their protected health information is definitely at risk. So, something the board needs to consider all of these things. It's a major changing world out there, and the board and the CEO are definitely ultimately responsible for any kind of a data breach. And if they're shareholders, they're not going to be happy campers if something goes wrong and a HIPAA violation occurs.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Susan. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts with me and just give everyone a little bit more, information about HIPAA and HIPAA compliance. So I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. It's an ever-changing thing, and I suggest that people read up on it, learn more about it, and find a really good IT person to conduct the security for their company so that they can stay out of trouble.
Thank you so much, Susan. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for this ExecRank Continuing Board Education program.